Taryn LaRae is a life speaker, business strategist, and creator of the Divine Alignment Framework. For over 20 years, she's been in business and along the way has been helping driven, self-inspired women bring their life and business into practical and spiritual alignment from the inside out. Through her company, Taryn LaRae's Business Hub, she teaches people how to get unstuck, move with intention, and build something that truly lasts, not just in success, but in purpose and in legacy. Her work centers on helping people reconnect from the inner design of their lives so they can live, lead, and build from a place of focus and spiritual alignment. Taryn wants to help us move beyond titles, trauma, and outside expectations. Her contribution is helping us to return to that inner blueprint that we were born with, what I call the divine programming, so they can live and build from a place of consciousness and peace. Please welcome Taryn LaRae to One Voice Evolving podcast. Taryn, welcome to One Voice Evolving. We are so happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And you are bringing a fresh voice about transforming from the inside out. You have a
Yep.
business, and we'd like to learn more about what prompted you to make that move and focus. How did you get there? And then how do you guide folks through it? And where do they find you when they're ready to make those kind of moves?
All right. Yeah, so I've started in business right after I graduated from college.
Uh-huh.
I've always been faith-based and service-oriented, and I decided that the first business that I wanted to embark on was actually a nonprofit. And I'm also a musician, and so I was actually balancing music and my nonprofit service. And
Uh-huh.
over the years, that kind of transitioned and developed, and I took on the role of a real estate developer, a real estate investor, as I should say.
Mhm.
And a lot of people were asking me, questions about how do I get a business started. I became like a go-to person, and so I decided to start a consulting business. One of the
Okay.
things over the years is that I had faith, but because of my challenges, my faith wavered. And my
Uh-huh.
dad, he was always telling me, you are going to find your footing in God again. And the more life developed and more life went on, I felt far away from it. And
Mhm.
it wasn't until my dad died. He died 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, actually. And I wanted to stay connected to my dad in some way.
Mhm.
And I went on a soul journey, a spiritual journey. And I found the term divine alignment within that spiritual journey. Because even though I had grew up in church, though that term was never presented, and just my dad's wisdom and my own faith and just researching and digging and really finding my way through the grief of what I was experiencing as well. I was telling my mom that in order to have any kind of true success, you have to start from the inside out. And it kind of went back to some of the principles that my dad was teaching me along the way, and that was, character and money go hand in hand, and just these principles of, um, having good character, not just having a good personality, but being in tune with who you are. And I was able to take the lessons that my dad passed on and just kind of expound on them through my own lived experience. And one of the sole ingredients that I was seeing is that from my own experience is once you're misaligned in the inside, it robs you of your joy. But when you begin to find alignment within yourself, you find peace. You find a sense of contentment, even in your oppositions. And the biggest mountain that I ever faced was losing my dad, someone that had been a part of my business journey every step of the way for 19 years. And actually, that was an ignition starter. That loss, it really set me on a path of, like I said, a soul journey, but a journey of being in tune with my own voice. And I know for a lot of women that are listening, especially women over 40, they're still trying to tap into their purpose. Um, if you realize that some of your losses are actually your gains, you'll have a different perspective. But I want you to kind of chime in just so that I won't keep going.
Oh my gosh, I love it. We've had some brilliant, brilliant speakers on here, and you are just one of them right out of the gate because what you talk about is resilience and the alignment, and the women
Yep.
who are the most impactful in our country today are women who have a bigger calling, who have
Yeah.
that
Yep.
divine alignment, because once
Yeah.
that comes into place, along with the peace comes power that you
Yes.
didn't have access to before.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
And that is what helps us stay the course and not waver when the next wave hits that could scare us.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, yep. One of my biggest issues, was anxiety and worry. And one of the things that I had working for me is that, when I started my journey back in 2004, I asked my dad, I said, um, I want to start a business. Are you willing to come on with me? And he said, yes.
Mm,
And so I had someone that was protective of me. I had someone that I can lean on. And so, a lot of times when I was worried or feeling anxiety or was, if we were closing on any kind of real estate deal, it would just give me so much, stress because you want all of the pieces lined up. And when my dad died, okay, now I don't have that covering anymore. And it really was me centering myself and really getting in tune with who is the concept of God that speaks to me, you know, and really finding, you know, finding that center, finding that anchor. And it really brought on a sense of peace in the deepest grief that I
mm,
that I was experiencing, but also as I decided to relaunch this business consulting practice. And I decided it wasn't just going to be a consulting practice. I decided as I was even evolving in my own message that, this isn't just about me teaching business principles, logistics, the mechanics of business. It has to be about life development as well, that spiritual grounding as well because again, once you can tap into that, once you can understand who you are as a person, once you can understand your values, once you know who's speaking in your ear, because part of your identity is shaped by whose voice is speaking into you.
yeah.
And, because of the fact that I had such a powerful voice, my dad, who understood himself, he was self assured, he had a strong sense of self, and he had perspective on his own unique identities. And that kept him from, ever being jealous and competitive of me. We had a divine co-partnership, and
Mm,
that was the rarity that I had. But
yeah.
again, when I lost my dad, now I'm my own, I'm anchoring my own ship. I'm steering the own wheel. But I realized that my highest asset is my own voice, is
Yes.
my own inner dialogue.
Yeah. You are so fortunate to have had that relationship, that
I
nurturing from
am.
your father,
Yep.
because as you're
Yeah.
talking, I'm getting hit with my father wounds. And, and
Yeah.
I'm like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, 97% of
Yep.
American families are dysfunctional
Yep.
and not always have that. And so by the time we are 18, if you're growing up in any kind of trauma drama household, you've got a master's degree in dysfunction. 20,000 hours
Yep.
of parrot tapes running around in there, most of them before you were 6 years old, running your life before you even had world enough to know. And so, what you're describing as deconstructing is what I did this year. I
Yeah.
deconstructed my white legacies. But
Yeah,
but it always happens. There's always a spiritual element to the
it is.
deconstructing. What is your idea of God, your God concept? Who said? Where did that come from? When those
Yep.
inner when that inner critic starts running, whose voice is that? So that you can
Right.
tease out your divine purpose and your and the voice whispering in your ear, that still small voice, from the cacophony of noise that we've picked up along the way. How do you
Well,
guide people through
oh,
that?
go Well, I've had my own challenges. The one asset that I had was my dad,
Yeah.
because I grew up in institutions that
Okay.
were supposed to benefit me, supposed
Mhm.
to protect me. But, like a lot of people that will listen to or, listen to this podcast episode or watch this video,
Mhm.
they understand what it means to have their own voice undermined, their own thoughts and reasons put in war. If it wasn't for my dad, I would have betrayed my own skill sets. I would have betrayed my own mind because the there were people within these confines, within these walls that were, you know, consistently tearing me down,
Oh, yeah.
consistently, telling me what I wasn't, consistently telling me I wouldn't make it, consistently telling me I was proud. Consistently demonized me,
Mhm.
and it was, which I didn't know, a sense of jealousy, a sense of
Yeah.
competitiveness,
Mhm.
projection of their own wounds,
Right.
but I'm just trying to be myself,
Uh,
and thankfully I had my dad to counterbalance. And so, you speak about your own father wounds, I've we
mhm.
had family wounds,
Yeah.
that never praised us, never acknowledged anything that we were doing,
Uh-huh.
but again, that counterbalance that I had, he was aligned with who he was despite his own challenges. And
Yeah.
that's why he was able to speak life into me.
Oh, nice. Nice, nice.
Yeah.
And so how does that translate now through your voice? I love that you've brought his legacy through this conversation. It honors
Right.
him and honors you.
Yeah. And,
And it
it
honors
was,
us.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
I feel like, my dad is the mantra that I've taken on, and it was not always easy to be able to speak about me and my dad's relationship just because of the fact that, most of our family is broken. You know,
Mhm.
um, we had always had like outsiders to say, I wish I had what you had. Or there were people that said, I'm just like that with my mom. But
Mhm.
aside from, my dad and I's relationship, we were kind of broken and disconnected, from, other people in our family. We were kind of the few that wanted to aspire to be an entrepreneur,
Uh-huh.
and so sometimes when you want to do things that's considered out of the box, it isolates you, and for many people, that isolation becomes a target for them to um, um, commit themselves to misunderstanding you.
Oh,
And so,
yes. Yeah.
yeah, so, it was a lot of challenges. And so for people that tune in and, they say, how do I find that voice? I think that for me, it
Mhm.
starts with those small steps of silencing the noise and silencing the critics. And, you talk about, your own father wounds, and there are people that, you know, they may come from environments. They don't come from natural environments that foster, you know, the resiliency that you spoke of. They don't foster confidence. They don't
Right.
foster you finding your path.
Mhm.
You have parents out here that they've made a decision already for their children and how they want their children to grow up and what they want their children to do. And when it doesn't work out like that, then there's the control, there's the manipulation. And so, people have to try to wiggle their way through through all of the noise and the chaos. And it's really about like finding silencing silencing all of that. And what I find helps and has always helped me was even journaling, processing what's going on, processing your thoughts. I'm not a sociologist and I'm not like a psychologist, but just through my own lived experience, I always tell people start with finding your voice on paper too. That's
Mhm.
a practical application for you to begin to uh, retrust yourself, retrust
Trust.
despite what the world is saying against you.
Yeah, that's so important. Trust is broken first with ourselves and then with
Yep,
our in the workplace, wherever I go.
yep.
And I tell people, that's my little sign, assume good intent. I say all the problems of the world could be solved if people did two things. Talk to people instead of about them, stop the gossip,
Mm,
and assume
mm.
good intent until they prove otherwise, right?
That's exactly true.
Mhm.
It's funny that sometimes I find, part of my therapy has been scrolling YouTube. Just some of
Uh-huh.
the things that the shorts are just completely hilarious.
Yeah.
But it was one guy that was on there. He didn't look like the person that had anything, wise to say. And someone stopped him to basically, kind of play a prank on him.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things that he said was, you know, um, everything isn't about malice. Some things, is about intention, good intention. And some things is about, people may just be incompetent. And so don't attribute everything to malice, what you can attribute to incompetence.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes along with what you're saying. Everything may not be attributed to bad intent,
Right.
you know,
Right. And I'm responsible for what I'm saying, but I'm not responsible for what you hear because all got our own filters
perspectives. Yeah.
in hearing. I want to go back for a minute to the grief cycle, just for a second, and for our audience, I'm just going to go over it quickly. But I'm so curious about your journey through that because because you you had to grieve the loss and find your voice kind of all in the same moments of it.
Yeah.
So the first part of grief cycle is denial. This didn't really happen, or it's not that bad, or it's gonna, there's an element where your body just goes into shock because it's too much to absorb all at once. And when that passes, and it's not ever linear, but then anger is one of the stages. And what I find with the people I work with who can't break through, who can't get a clear story inside to build from, is they get stuck
Mm.
somewhere in the grief process. They get
Yep.
stuck in the anger. The hospital did it, the culture did it, the police did it, the smoking did it. They want something to blame. And then they bargain.
Yep.
Part of it is bargaining. Maybe if I, and one of the things about corporate culture that I hate so much, the stupidest thing I ever heard, is when somebody dies, you get 3 days of bereavement leave.
Wow. Wow.
I
Okay.
I can't breathe for 3 days. What do you want me to do on day four again? Because that's
Yeah.
not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
the bargaining, and then ultimately depression, which is
Okay.
you just have to feel the gut punch of what life just handed you, a shit sandwich that you didn't ask for and you
Mm.
didn't see coming before you can move through to acceptance. And people try to do spiritual bypassing on the messy middle of grieving. They want to go from
Yeah.
denial to acceptance, and that's why they throw themselves back into work so they don't feel so fast,
Mhm.
right? Instead of
Yeah.
feeling their way through it. And sometimes in that grief process, we tend to want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. When we start
Yeah.
deconstructing the voices that we've been told and what we're going to carry forward and what we're going to leave behind, it's easy to say everything that person said was of no value and I'm not going to live like that. It's kind of how we distance
Yeah.
from God. We're going to throw the baby out
Yeah.
with the bathwater. And
Mhm.
the grieving process is a real opportunity not to be broken, but to be broken open so that
Mm.
you can see with a fresh set of eyes who
Yeah.
you are that needs to come forward and maybe couldn't. Does any of that make sense to you?
It makes absolute sense. Everything that you're saying. I was just trying to, see where I was, like as you were talking. and how did I process this grief? Um, as you were saying, going through the 5 stages of the grief,
Mhm.
process. And for me, um, I didn't experience that first denial, that first. It was a
Uh-huh.
range of experience, a range of emotions.
Yeah,
Um,
big ones.
it was something that I can't even almost explain,
Mhm.
because my dad was my footing. He was my anchor. He was the one person on this planet that I can 100% rely on. I mean, he may come late, but I knew he would be there.
Yeah.
And so losing my dad to cancer, because he ultimately died of cancer. Um, it felt the day that, because I actually found him.
Mhm.
We were actually supposed to run errands that day.
Uh-huh.
And, I had talked to him earlier, and the last thing he said or asked me was, how are your business plans coming? And I went on explaining to him. And later on that, maybe about a couple of hours later, I went, to his place and, found him. He was gone.
Yeah.
And my soul left my body.
Okay.
So it was just like, the strange thing that happened is that 6 months before my dad passed, one of my really good friends, he died. And he was the special person in his family. He was a musician as well.
Mhm.
And he, he was a leader. A lot of the kids from college, they followed him. They wanted to be like him. And, so I was dealing with, the death of that guy, Corey. But then a year before, I was dealing with a really good friend also from that I had met in the neighborhood. And
Mhm.
so the guy from the year prior, his name was Parker, and he was an only child. And, in order for me to get past my dad's death, because it felt isolating and it felt like something had just happened to me. I was able to constantly reflect back on this compounded grief that I had been experiencing from Parker and Corey, and saying, you know, um, I need to, tune into the reality of what's happening, and I would begin to like research death. Why does death occur? Why does God even allow death to occur? What is the logistics of death, in our planet or on our planet? Like, why do we have to continue to evolve? I wanted to be real with myself, because this wasn't going away. My dad was never coming back, and I needed to, you know, um, be honest about that. As hard as it was, I needed to face the reality that my dad wasn't coming back. And as I faced that reality, another reality was me saying, what am I gaining from my dad? Why did God allow my dad to leave? And I began to pull out the positives. And you talk about legacy. I wasn't looking at it as legacy at that point. I was looking at it like, he gave me an invaluable gift of wisdom. And I had the rarity of having a father that was 100% present. And now it's up to me to take what, he instilled in me and apply it. And I looked at that as part of the lesson. I looked at that as part of the gain. I looked at that as part of the asset. It wasn't easy getting to, where I was with my dad's death. It was very hard, but hard is not hopeless. And I realized that, death isn't just something singular to my dad. I had experienced so many deaths even before my dad passed. But, you know, one of the things that I wanted to do, you talk about people jumping back into their work to kind of dismiss their feelings. It really, for me, I decided to relaunch my business 1 month after my dad passed. And it wasn't about me dismissing my feelings, it was about me moving forward in my purpose, moving forward in what I felt would be the evolution of my next level. And that's kind of how I, took my dad's death incrementally. And even, last night, I missed my dad. You know, there's moments that I still haven't um comprehended the fullness of his death. It was very haunting for me to go down the street and see a restaurant that we frequented, or the gas station, or, you know, a
Mhm.
store or whatever.
Mhm.
My dad's imprint is placed all over Chicago,
Yeah.
and I had to deal with that,
Mhm.
and I had to deal with it with a realistic lens, and I think that's what helped me um, take those steps forward. And then, knowing that I'm not here just to sit idle, I'm here to produce, I'm here to make an impact. You know, if I decided to give up, there'll be people that I will miss, connecting with, just like you. I'm so fortunate that you and I are able to sit in this space and time and have this conversation. And that there are people that will be listening in on this conversation that will glean lessons just from this moment in time that we decided to push past problems that we had and kept
Uh-huh.
going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You made such a good point when you were talking about the quality of questions. I'm always talking about that internal dialogue, but it all hinges on your mind is going to answer whatever question you ask it. If you say,
Yes.
why me? Why me? It's going to tell you why you because it's your fault. But if you say, so what is the point of this? God, what are you trying to show me? Or so what is it really about death? If I'm curious about that, and what about I've lost three of my siblings in the last 2 years. I'm the youngest of five, and one by
Wow.
one, the beauty of being the youngest is you get to be pampered and spoiled, and the downfall is you get to see everybody go first. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, but so I've got
I'm
a
the
little bit of
youngest
grief
too.
cycle,
So,
and I know about the way grief sneaks up on you even 2 or 3 years later out of
yes.
nowhere, and it's like wave.
Yep.
And what I've learned to do is just embrace the wave. It's kind of like being in the ocean. Ain't no point trying to fight against it. You just lay
Yep.
yourself out and ride it into shore.
You write it in. Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
I just allowed myself to experience every emotion,
absolutely.
and I mean, there were times that, when it kind of first happened, that I would have to go into the car and just scream,
Hmm.
because nobody could really like push me through.
Yeah.
Words couldn't push me through. I had to allow myself to experience every emotion.
Yeah.
And, even when I had thoughts that made me laugh, I would laugh.
Mhm.
Sometimes I found myself hearing my dad, so fluently that I would speak and I would find myself saying things out loud, almost like that movie Ghost.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, hey, I had to allow myself to experience those things, to process, the depth and be able to move forward, you
Mhm.
know.
I want to bring forth a little bit about your your background, your artistic soul, because
Okay.
I think that the people who are artistic in some level move differently in our world and through emotional things than other people are equipped to. I had a guest on a few weeks ago who said that music is the best way to get through the noise of the culture to get to somebody's heart and soul because it bypasses the logical brain. If a
Wow.
child, an infant will listen to music and tap their toe. It has nothing to do with cognitive functioning. It is a soul experience.
It
Can
is.
do you see any alignment in that who you were born to be and how that
Oh,
has moved you through this
you
different?
know, um, music is mood setting. That's
Yeah.
why it's able to tap into our soul. Like you said, it bypasses the brain because it's tapping into,
Okay.
our emotions. You
Hmm.
know, one of the things about what happened to me though is I think I went the opposite direction in
Hmm.
terms of a creative path. I couldn't listen to a lot of music because I knew what it would do to my spirit, because I knew what it would do to my soul.
Yeah.
Um, and I made a diligent effort to keep my spirits up because, like you said, one
Mhm.
of those, processing, traits of grief is depression, and
Yes.
I couldn't allow myself to slip into depression, you
Mhm.
know. And so I was very mindful, about making sure that I didn't listen to music that would get penetrate my heart too much. But, outside of that, outside of the grief, just going into, my ability as a musician, I've been playing, keyboard, I play drums, I do writing, I was working in music studios. Um, and it has always been part of my full expression.
Mhm.
Business is one thing, but my creative journey, music and writing, is another part of who I am. And, I think that that creative part, it keeps me having a personality because sometimes in business, you can, kind of be, constrained. And the good thing though is that, by me being able to be a musician and a versatile musician, being able to play, R&B, pop, dance, EDM, it keeps me feeling personable. It keeps me laughing and dancing and, just
Brings you
tuned
joy.
into the less serious side of things too,
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
love that. So in the business you've created now, do you get to bring all of who you are to that table?
Definitely. And that's the beauty of entrepreneurship. I
Yeah.
don't have any confines.
Yeah.
I'm able to be myself. And that's one of the reasons why I've always stayed in the lane of entrepreneurship. I've been
Mhm.
fortunate to, be self-sustained since
Uh,
2004. You're talking
yeah.
about 21 years. I've always found a way to sustain myself through some form of entrepreneurship because of the autonomy that I have, because
Mhm.
of the agency that I have. And it's one of the reasons why, um, my business messaging is not just about spiritual empowerment, but it's also about the business empowerment, because if you have agency over the blueprint of your life,
Mhm.
that's you're tapping into a sense of nirvana at that point.
Yeah.
That's where we want to be.
Agency. And so tell me where people find you and how you move them to their own sense of agency. Can you give us a little of the how you do it?
It depends on what steps a person, are in.
Yeah.
Everybody's journey is different. And
Yeah.
so, with the business products that I've created, again, I speak about how, years ago, about 12 years ago, people were beginning to come to me as the go-to person to
Mhm.
understand how to
Mm.
start a business. So
Yeah.
I wrote a book. That book is Intentional Progress, uh, get unstuck and start your business. So
Mhm.
it answers some of the most prevalent, key components for the logistical side of starting a business, but also
Mhm.
it taps into understanding willpower,
Mhm.
understanding self-determination, some of the key traits that you'll need to empower yourself inside so that you can have a successful, business.
Mhm.
And with other uh, parts of people's journeys, I've worked with doctors that wanted to grow their business, and so middle market people or more advanced people that want to work with me, I do mentorship. I do life mentorship, but I also do the business mentorship, and so it just
Mhm.
depends. Again, I'm not a psychologist, but
Right.
certain people find my lived experience as a framework to move forward. And they want to be able to talk to me one on one in terms of certain things that they see that are
Mhm.
broken or disconnected or misaligned and help me pinpoint some of those things for them to be able to move forward. And so I offer the life mentorship and the
Mhm.
business mentorship.
Well, I think this is especially appropriate now. This is going to air in early 2026 at a time in the United States when job loss is happening, and and there are a lot of people who are forced into early retirement or
Yeah.
or forced entrepreneurship, but they don't know how because there is a particular flexibility required. If you've, for example, been working for the government for 30 years and now you need to switch gears, how how would your conversation be different now about how to build an entrepreneurial business than it might have been, 12 years ago when you wrote the book?
You know, I don't think some of the frameworks are different because it's about
Mhm.
tapping into your divine blueprint. What are you good at? What do you like? What are you passionate about? These
Yeah.
are all questions that have to be answered. So
Mhm.
whether you have worked, Fortune 500 company and you decide, hey, I have something that's on the inside of me that it's a prototype I feel like needs to be in the world. These
Yeah.
are questions that, needs to still be answered
Yeah.
because even though you may have a great ideal, you may not be called to be the CEO of that
Mhm.
ideal. And
Mhm.
so, taking time just to see the strengths and the weaknesses and, really fine tuning why God has you here. What is your next step? What do you feel like if you're talking about trusting that voice? What is the voice telling you? How's that voice leading you? Where is it leading you? And who do you have around you? So these are all steps that still has to be answered, whether it's 12
Right.
years ago, today, and the next 12 years following. You can't skip these steps.
Yeah. That is why I love working with women over 40 because somewhere around
Yeah,
40 they start perimenopause, their hormones, our hormones start to shift. We start empty nesting. All of a sudden I have disposable income I didn't know I have. And who am I if I am not the caregiver of a dozen other people?
yeah,
And that always takes us into an internal journey of back to that blueprint. We're asking the questions, even if we don't know what the questions are yet. I always said
yeah,
about my 40s, just when I thought I had all the answers, the questions changed.
yeah.
And there are
Wow. Yeah,
people in our country right now who have been looking for retirement or looking for whatever they thought their next step was. And just when they thought they had it all nailed down, shift,
yeah.
surviving the shift.
Well, that's what life is about. It's a constant evolution. And even when we pass, for my dad's passing, he's still living. It's just the form of his life is different. you
Mhm.
know. Um, but the essence of him being in my life, it has
Yeah.
changed, but he's still there.
Mhm.
But as long as you have breath on you in your body, you have to keep evolving, moving forward. Life keeps going, and you have to
Mhm.
journey along with it. Especially to have fulfillment in life. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, and joy. I didn't know what joy was when I was busy checking the box of what I should do next, who I should be so people would like me, all of that.
Uh,
Post-menopause, I was able to revisit all of that and oh, that's joy. We weren't raised in a
yeah,
household of joy. We were raised in a household of rules and regulations.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
big difference. So where do people
yeah.
find you? How can they reach out to you? And what would their next steps
So
be from this podcast?
So if you decide that you want to work with me personally or you wanted to, purchase any of my products, whether it's the, intentional progress book, whether it's, joining a wait list for some other products that I have coming, whether it's, taking the course, the business course, you can definitely find me at my website, and that is www.terransbusinesshub.com.
Taryn. Yeah.
S
Okay.
Business
Okay.
hub.com.
.com.
Terrence Business Hub.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Are there any parting thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience or that I might have not thought to ask?
Um, One of the things that I just want to just say as a parting thought is that understand that alignment is not about perfection.
Mm.
It's just about truth. And once you are able to tap into who you truly are, what your
Mhm.
values truly are, the direction that you really truly want to head in, then the pressure is taken off and you'll be able to find a pathway to peace.
Taryn, thank you so much for this
Thank you
day,
so much.
and your presence here has been fruitful and honoring to your listeners and
Thank
to
you.
your father. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed myself.